Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristen Jilks.
Welcome to the Electric Wire. I'm your host, Kristen Jilks, and today we're sharing a recent interview with Representative Adam Neylon, a Republican legislator from Pewaukee who was first elected in 2013. Representative Neylon has been serving on the Assembly Energy and Utilities Committee ever since he first got elected. I want to thank both Representative Neylon and Representative Supreme-Moore Omakunde, who joined for our previous episode, for giving us more insights into how these legislators approach energy and utilities issues. One issue that was a common theme in both interviews was the potential to include nuclear power in Wisconsin's energy mix. And I will turn you over to my interview with Representative Adam Neylon now. Thanks for listening. Okay, so we're here to talk about energy issues. Also, one other thing that I happened to hear when I said I was doing this podcast episode with you is that you may have some sort of like broadcast background, or have you done some radio things?
Well, I've been told I have the face for radio, so I have decided to use my voice on some different things. I did do broadcasting for a while. I was the voice of Carroll football and basketball for a while.
Okay, yes.
I did I broadcasted. It started as the radio, but we were doing video feeds, and I did that for several years. Even after I graduated, they asked me to come back and do it.
Nice.
Which was fun. And so I've also dabbled with some YouTube stuff in the past, but I have that buried so deep nobody will ever find it.
Shoot. I don't know. We could probably get some of our Electric Wire listeners on that if needed.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't tempt people to go looking.
Fair enough. So then tell us how did you get into the legislature? What spurred your interest then going from sort of broadcast mediums to the legislature?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And, for broadcasting and media and stuff, that's been something that's an interest of mine. I actually studied political science and communications, and I started working in politics for a congressman out of college. Was my first job, and kind of was introduced into that world. Went out to DC and then decided politics wasn't for me. Right. So
funny.
Oddly enough, I moved back to Wisconsin to get rid of or escape politics. And I started a window cleaning business. But politics is kind of in my blood. It's something I'm passionate about. It's something I pay attention to. I pay attention what's going on at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, at the national level. I'm opinionated. I have feelings toward things. So it drew me back into the political world. And so in 2013, there was a special election that was happening in the district that I was living in, Pewaukee, Waukesha, and Sussex. I had worked again in Congress. I had worked on campaigns. I had worked briefly in the state legislature. I had an internship there and briefly worked there. So I was familiar with that world. So in 2013, I ran in a special election and have been there ever since. So I'm currently in my 7th term. At the time when I ran, I was a young buck, a kid in my 20s, and I was eager to offer a perspective of somebody different, right? Somebody that was starting a family, had a small business, somebody that was familiar with government, familiar with public policy, but also had real world experience and was a different voice. And so I thought, why not me? And I ran in a very heated race where it was 5 people in a primary, and whoever was going to win in that primary was going to win the special. And it was, I ended up winning by 29 votes and have won re-election ever since.
That's awesome. Nice. And have you been on the Energy and Utilities Committee the whole time you've been in the legislature?
I have. Yeah. It's something that it always interested me, just kind of we talked about broadcast and communications, energy and my dad, growing up, my dad is a project manager and worked in a lot of nuclear power plants.
Oh, okay.
And so it was a world that like I was familiar with and that I was interested in. It's not something that like I pursued as a career or as a path, but like energy issues have always been something that have interested me. And I thought that that would be something that I would enjoy working on and something that's important, right? I want to like use my time and effort for things that really matter, right? And things that are important and things that could really shape the future. And I feel like energy is one of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I agree, and I'm guessing most of our listeners agree as
I'd agree.
well.
Yeah, I assume. Yeah.
Um, that's really interesting to know about your dad. One of my questions to you is going to be about your support for a resolution stating the legislature's support for nuclear as a source
Mhm.
of clean energy. And so, yeah, I'm just curious to know more about what, your support for nuclear power as potential generation source in Wisconsin's energy mix.
Yeah, great question. I mean, everybody is like shaped by their perspective, right? I think that's inevitable, right? That we are creatures of our experience, like, and, environment, right? There, and some of that does lead to my support of nuclear rights. Because when I was like younger, like I was familiar with like nuclear power plants, like I'd visit, and like in my experience, it was always like, really impressed, right? Really clean, always felt really safe, like the protocols, like like some of the things you had to follow seemed like over the top, but it was also like made you feel like, oh, it's important. Safety is important, right? It was always very clear how important safety was. And so my perspective has been shaped by nuclear being a very clean, very, safe under the right conditions, right? And that was always my experience. So I was, my perspective was shaped by it being a viable option and something that should be part of the discussion. And I feel that other people might have different experiences through like what they've read in the media or what's been portrayed in their lives or whatever. But in mine, I always had a very positive outlook on nuclear and think it should be part of the equation.
Yeah, I agree. So that being said, do you have a set of guiding principles so you've been evaluating energy policy and
Mhm.
energy issues for a while now. Do you have a set of like guiding principles that you think as you're looking at different pieces of legislation that,
Mhm.
sort of help you evaluate if this proposal would fit in with your energy values?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question as well. I mean, I want to start by saying like one of the things that drives me is to try to reduce the cost. If
Hmm.
there are ways that we can look to reduce cost from, for our consumers, that's always an important component. Like what I'm able to do in that regard could be limited, but like in terms of like how I see, like what are my guiding principles? Like one thing I'll ask is like, what is this going to do to ratepayers? Like, what does this mean for ratepayers? Like, is this a good for ratepayers or is this bad for ratepayers? Not just businesses, but also individual consumers, right? Like, is this good for ratepayers or not? But I also, I will like say that I do care about the environment. Like, it is a principle, like, and what that means, I think, looks different for everybody because I think there is a place for like we can meet in the middle on commerce and protecting the environment. I don't think it has to be one or the other. Like we need to choose one or the other to care about, right? I think we can prioritize both of those. And one of the things that I think about truly is like, what does this mean for the environment? Like, what does this mean for water? What does this mean for the air? Like, what is it? And you know, is there something that we should be doing in terms of regulating this, right? So I think about that. I like to joke that like amongst Republicans, I'm often considered an environmentalist. But amongst the my environmentalists, I'm just considered a Republican, right?
Yes.
They don't really look past that. But it is truly something that like I think about, like, and I care about protecting like what we have for future generations.
I remember a couple of years ago, you had authored legislation that would have used VW settlement funding for EV charging
Hmm.
stations. So this was money that was coming into the state from a settlement, and some of those resources would have been directed towards EV charging stations. So I know that not everyone in the party was as excited about that idea
That's a nice way
as
to
you
put
were.
it. Yeah.
Yes, right. So do you have thoughts? Do you look back on that and think that was the right call?
Absolutely. And the only problem with that, the lesson that I learned from these things is maybe don't propose something that has no chance. Like, what are you trying to, but like, I
I thought
thought
it had a
having,
chance.
I
I
thought
think I testified in
maybe in
support.
retrospect, I should have had a few more conversations with people before publicizing it. But I have no, like, I'm proud to point back, like, I won bipartisan awards for that proposing those
Mhm. Nice.
legislation, right? So it's something, and the thing that really like about all that, and so the EV settle, like Volkswagen settlement money that you mentioned, I did propose to use that money to create like an EV network throughout Wisconsin, and I thought people would love the idea of it being non-taxpayer funded, right? We're not
Right.
using any taxpayer money, which I thought was going to be the obstacle, right? I thought like,
Hmm.
all right, we can promote EVs and we can build an infrastructure, but if we use taxpayer money, I know there's conservatives that are going to be opposed to this, right?
Yeah.
But if we take private money, like the settlement money that we're getting from a private company that needs to pay us based on, the settlement where they were caught polluting our environment, right? And they're giving
Hmm.
us money as a settlement that needs to be used to offset the pollution, right? We were limited in what we could do with that funding,
Yes.
right? We can't put it into state GPR and put it into school funding, right? That wasn't an option. It needed to be something to offset the emissions and the pollution that had already been put in our environment, right? So the options were limited in terms of what we could do. And my idea was to do a public-private partnership using that money where we can administer grant funds using that private money and get matched by other private money and then oversee kind of the implementation and make sure that where we're putting them makes sense. So that was the idea. And as you indicated, there was a lot of people against it, but also talk radio grabbed it. And this is the thing that killed me. Like, they misconstrued the whole thing. Like, everybody that contacted me against it thought I was using taxpayer money, right? It was, so when I explained to them, as I just did, that it was private funded money that needed to be used to offset emissions, and the alternative was actually going to be giving it to cities to put into like buses and things that we were going to then need to do ongoing maintenance, and we were going to assume the liability of these projects, which we ended up doing, instead of just doing these grants that could have had matching private funding. So I think the whole conversation like got twisted, and we ended up
Yeah.
with a worse product because of that.
Yeah.
But I was proud of and it wasn't just that EV. We also did some workforce development initiatives, some additional funding for conservation efforts. It was an Earth Day package. It was like
Yes.
4 bills that we'd put together to show that, look, we care about the environment too. We might have different ways of approaching it. It might be more based on private funding and maybe entrepreneurial or enterprising, as opposed to just putting funding uh, into a program. But I was proud to do it, and if I thought it could get done, or if there was a situation where we'd have additional money and need to use it for similar things, I'd do it again.
Nice. Well, cool. Thanks for that. It's nice that you can get your side out as well, even if
For
it's a
sure.
couple years later. Do you think there's other areas in the energy space that could get bipartisan support? You mentioned winning a bipartisan award for
Mhm.
your work on the EV issues. Are there other areas in the energy space that could receive bipartisan support?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, I think nuclear might be one of them, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that could be an issue. Like, I think one of the things, and I could elaborate on this later if you want, but like one of the things I think, like changing from renewable to like the focus on clean energy and like including nuclear as part of like a clean energy future, I think could find some bipartisan support. I think even you're seeing more support with Republicans on like solar energy. A lot of that is market driven, right? It's becoming more cost effective. Like you can make an economic case for some of these clean energies now that you might not been able to make as much of an economic case when they first came online, right? So I think like when you start to see that you can make an economic case for things like solar, and you can make a case for nuclear being considered clean energy and part of our clean energy future, I think that can be a place for some bipartisanship. I've seen some issues on solar already that might be a place for some bipartisan agreement. But yeah, I think they certainly exist in this space because at the end of the day, like, and one of the reasons I'm attracted to this issue is it's not as blatantly partisan, right? It's not as
Yeah.
clearly like there's no line in the sand on these issues like, oh, fusion is a Democratic idea, right? Battery
Right.
storage is a Republican idea, right?
Yeah.
We're just trying to do what's in the best interest of our state. And I think that in this industry and in this area, there's a lot of room for agreement.
I totally agree. And that's one of the things I've always liked about this industry is the weather. It's like there's for sure a ton of like bipartisan issues. And then when things do become divisive, it's like the strangest coalitions sometimes. You know what I mean? You
That's
never
true.
know what side of the aisle they're coming from
So
necessarily.
true.
But yeah, it keeps it interesting. We've talked in the past about sort of the load growth that's happening in the
Mm-hmm.
energy industry right now. You know, AI causing data center expansions, and increasing energy demand, and also increased electrification and electric vehicles. This is all causing demand for energy that we haven't seen increase like
Mm-hmm.
this in quite some time. I think people are saying like since the advent of air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a growing demand for energy right now, and I'm curious, do you have thoughts on as we see more data centers coming in or see more
Mm-hmm.
demand for energy? Do you have thoughts on where this is all going?
I have fears, I'm not sure. Like, I mean, generally speaking, I think people look at these things as positives, right? Development, um, higher tax base, more opportunities, construction, jobs, right? Maintenance jobs. So I think and local governments really like this for the tax revenues that they'll generate. These things are massive. But my fears, right, are in what it means for the consumer, right? I mean, like you said, I've raised this issue in like I even used that example that we talked about air conditioning, and it's like it's 10 times that. It's 10 times that. Like
Yeah.
the scale of what we're looking at in the future is like tremendous, right? And
Hmm.
I do worry like what that means for ratepayers, but also like just going back to my point earlier, like what that means for our world, right? What it means for if we're not able to do like nuclear, if we're not able to do large scale clean energy projects, like what that could mean. And I'm curious, like where the modern day environmentalists are in all this when it comes to these data centers, when it comes to Bitcoin mining, when it comes to all these new technologies that there doesn't seem to be a lot of pushback in that space. So I'm curious, like, I mean, as from my perspective, there are like general fears, and I'm not sure like what the right solution is in terms of like state regulations. I think in some ways this is not a regulatory problem, but in other ways we need to be aware of it and ready to act if there are things that the state needs to intervene on to make sure we're protecting ratepayers and we're protecting clean air and clean water and things that are of value to preserving for our future. But by and large, I mean, I might, I consider myself a skeptic more than a, somebody that's generally supportive of some of these large scale projects. I'm just not sure they're in the best interest of Wisconsin right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think there will be a lot more discussions happening on this. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to put in a plug for CFC's Power Breakfast on data centers. You can go to WisconsinEye and search for Customers First Coalition, and all of our Power Breakfasts are archived.
Yeah, that's a great plug, and it's really an important thing to have a conversation about and learn more about, because I mean we're at the very early stages of something that's going to be an important topic for years to come.
Perfect. Thanks. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes to information about the data center power breakfast. Before we get to our last question, I always like to pick legislators' brains a little bit and see if when your constituents contact you on energy issues, what do you hear about from your constituents?
Mostly my interaction with constituents on energy issues are twofold. One is when if there's like people complaining about like rates or the cost, the increases, um, or general like power outage type things, like being
Yeah.
aware of like being made aware of different like issues on the grid and things. But it's interesting because it's like, as important as this issue is, it's not like a conversation that is really happens amongst like friends and neighbors in terms of like the future of energy or clean energy, or is nuclear part of the
Yeah.
solution, right? It's just it tends to be like something that uh people are impacted by, and they're very aware of how important it is, but just don't feel as comfortable speaking with any authority on it, and they just want to know, they just want to trust that their power is going to go on when they flip a light switch, right? They
Yeah.
want us to do everything we can to try to control costs from getting out of control, and want to be able to make sure that there's some certainty in the lights turning on, but outside of that, there's not a ton. I mean, we do have, I will say that one of the things that's emerging in our neighborhoods, like that I'm hearing from people, is like the emergence of like people knocking on their door and trying to sell them solar panels, like
Yeah.
that even though like third party financing is not really a thing here, like we still have companies going into neighborhoods, knocking on doors and trying to sign them up for their their solar companies plan, right? So that's been an interesting wrinkle in kind of the energy discussion. I know they've gone through our neighborhood, they've gone through a couple of neighborhoods in my district, and people are curious about that and learning more, and like, is this allowed? Like what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah. That's fair enough. And maybe in the show notes, I'll link to an episode we've done on consumer protections as it relates to some of these individual residential solar installers. I know that DATCAP has some oversight there, but it is one of those things where they're coming by and it seems like they're selling a product that is too good to be true in some cases, and in some cases it might be.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's something to really closely watch as we move forward.
Hmm.
I know when you were talking about the affordability and reliability piece, when Customers First was first founded, that was kind of the tagline. It's a coalition to preserve Wisconsin's affordable and reliable electricity. And when we were founded, it was, the thought was and still is that regulated utilities provide that stable, long-term, affordable, and reliable energy. And I think that Wisconsin's regulatory environment is probably part of why it can just fall into the background in so many cases, because it's like they're doing a pretty good job.
Mm.
Not perfect, but
Sure.
we do have that luxury of pretty affordable and reliable power over the long term. So I'll stop there. And then, and is there anything else you feel like we've missed in this discussion?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's a we're kind of on the like dawn of like a new era, I feel,
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, with energy and artificial intelligence and just like technology and how people, how renewable and clean energy affordability and, with these data centers. So, we're in an interesting time, especially in this industry. And when we talk about like our role as a legislature in creating a better future, I think that our efforts currently trying to make nuclear part of the conversation, trying to maybe convert some of these old shut down utility like generating energy generators into potential nuclear sites, like
Mhm.
the potential of maybe some like smaller type module nuclear reactors. Like I think we're in a really interesting time. Same with like some of the advances in fusion technology, even here in Wisconsin. And I'm excited to be part of it. And I think that the way to have a better future, though, especially in this industry, is we got to find some common ground, like you're indicating earlier. Like we got to find some common bipartisan solutions, so we can really move the ball forward in Wisconsin.
Agreed. Thank you. All right, um, now we'll get to our last question that we
All
ask
right.
all of our guests,
All right.
and that is, if you had all the power in the industry, what
Hmm.
would you do with it?
It's a great question, and I I think there's a distinction between all the power and all the money, because I'm not sure if I
Oh,
had
there
all the
is.
power, it might be different than if I had all the money in the world, right? If I had Bill
Yeah.
Gates money, it might be I might be building my own nuclear power plant. But if I had all the power in the world, I would say that for one, I would look, or all the power in Wisconsin. I would say that for one, we need to advance nuclear energy, right? And we need to let's make that considered clean energy. Let's change that renewable energy standard or the goal that we're looking at setting in 2030 or whatever it is, or whatever Ever's goal about getting, renewable, like 80% renewable by, I'd say like if I had all the power, let's change that to include nuclear as part of that, because it's clean energy, right? And that should be part of the calculation. I'd also look at potentially some sort of project or some sort of investment where we could look at like implementing some sort of state like battery storage system or some sort of like improving the grid, maybe making some like efficiencies and improvements on the grid that could also incorporate some sort of like storage, like future storage development, and just kind of transition more into nuclear energy as a primary source of energy in Wisconsin. I think then we could really take the lead in that area. So if I had all the power, I would probably change the standards of renewable to make it clean energy. I'd include nuclear as a major factor in the equation of our future production. And I would also update and modernize the grid and look at potentially having some sort of like battery storage project that we make us a leader in our state energy grid.
I love it. Very comprehensive.
All
Great
right.
ideas. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.